In this video, I will show you everything you need to get started with DaVinci Resolve 20. If you don't know anything about DaVinci Resolve 20 and are just getting started, then this video is perfect for you. I will show you where to find things in DaVinci Resolve 20 and what you need to get started on your first projects with DaVinci Resolve. On this channel, you will find in future tutorials on DaVinci Resolve and tips and tricks on post-production and filmmaking in general. Everything I show in this video can be done with the free version of DaVinci Resolve 20. The studio version offers a few additional features, especially AI features. The latest version of DaVinci Resolve 20 also includes some new practical tools, but you don't need them at first. This means that if you're just starting out with DaVinci Resolve 20 and want to try it out, you can do everything you need to do with the free version. And if you eventually start working more professionally, it's definitely worth upgrading to the studio version. So, let's get started right away. When we open DaVinci Resolve 20, we are greeted by this project manager. And the project manager contains all of our projects. Currently, there is one project in my project manager. You should have none, because you haven't created a project yet. That means to create a new project now, I go to New Project at the bottom and simply enter the name of my new project. DaVinci Resolve 20 Beginner Tutorial. And then we come to DaVinci Resolve 20, specifically the cut page in this case. To give you a brief overview of how DaVinci Resolve is structured, let's start by taking a look at the different workspaces available in DaVinci Resolve 20. But so that we can see something, I would first like to import some material into this project. In this case, I'm using footage that you can easily download. It's from the Blackmagic design training courses. You can find it on the DaVinci Resolve Studio website under training. I took it from the first editing course because it contains some material that we can use here and that you can easily download. This training page is basically Blackmagic's one-stop shop for learning Resolve without guessing what to watch next. It starts with the big pitch about getting certified, plus the obvious buttons to grab the free Resolve download or the studio version. Then it turns into a playlist hub. Training videos are grouped by the main pages in Resolve, so Edit covers the timeline basics, multicam and edit page effects. Color jumps into grading and color management. Fairlight focuses on audit cleanup and mixing. And Fusion is the intro to virtual effects and motion graphics. Each lesson tile usually comes with a video button and a project file download, so it's easy to follow along with the same footage. Lower on the page, there are training books like the Beginner's Guide with lesson files. And the site also shows hardware categories like panels and keyboards. And here I have the footage from Blackmagic in this downloads folder now. Since we are just taking the video clips out of it, I'll take the entire video clips folder in this case. For the import, I first go over to the edit page and we drag and drop it into this media pool. First, we create 3 bins under the master folder on the left side. Video clips, audio clips, and sound effects. We click on the video clips bin and right-click in this area and choose Import Media. Then we select the respective media. And now we get a message that tells us that we should adjust the project frame rate, because the footage has a different frame rate than the timeline or the project settings. This is a standard setting that can also be changed. By default, I think it's 25 frames per second. In this case, the video clips now appear to be at a different frame rate. We can check that right away. And now we will press change here first. In most cases, you can click on change and the whole thing will work itself out. We repeat the import also for audio clips and sound effects. But let me explain again in detail what this is all about, because it's quite important. Let's take a quick look at the media pool. We now have these clips here, and since we created these folders on the left-hand area, it has taken over the folder structure. Accordingly, I now have a video clips folder here with the video clips that I just imported. If I were to drag them to the right-hand area, everything would simply be unpacked and placed in the master folder. But now I can see that these video, audio and sound effects folders are in here, which has been created with the folder structure. This is especially useful if I have already pre-sorted my material on the computer and want to have the same structure here. Before you start the project, you should first take a moment to consider the frame rate and set it correctly, because it's not so easy to change it later once you have created the timeline. To access the project settings, click on the gear icon in the lower right corner. In the top tab, Master Settings, you will see the important settings at the top, including the timeline frame rate, which is currently set to 23.976 frames per second. I can also select other frame rates. In this case, it has now been changed because my footage is set to 23.976, that is 24 frames per second. We can check this by hovering over a clip like this, clicking on this eye here, and then we can see the frame rate here. And theoretically, we can also select a list view here. Therefore, we go to this icon, click on list view, and then we can scroll back here until the end, where the FPS should also be displayed. And here they are, all 23.976. That's good. Everything is the same, so we can work with this very well. In case FPS is not displayed, you right-click on the header, select Customize Columns, and here you can select FPS and save it. If you have clips with mixed frame rate, you have to think about how to solve this wisely. That's not really ideal. I would then recommend using the lowest frame rate. Typically, you use 24, 25 or 30 frames per second. In this case, just use the lowest frame rate available here. That should work best. Then set it here in the project settings under timeline frame rate. We don't adjust the playback frame rate, it adjusts automatically. It should always be the same as the timeline frame rate above. We also have another setting here, namely the timeline resolution. This is currently set to Full HD. We'll leave it like that for now. If you want to export the video in 4K at the end, you can also set it to Ultra HD here. One more thing before we really get started, the user interface of DaVinci Resolve 20 can also be switched to other languages, like German. If you go to DaVinci Resolve 20 in the top left corner and then to Preferences, you will find the language setting under User in the UI settings, where you can now select German if you wish. Now, let's take a quick look at the basic structure of DaVinci Resolve 20 by going through the areas below. These are the 7 different pages, the various workspaces in DaVinci Resolve 20. Blackmagic designed it so that in post-production, that is the process of video editing through to the finished video product, you work through these individual sections from left to right, and that's basically what you do. We'll start here on the left with the media page. There we can see our clips again here in the media pool. This means that we can already see that the edit page and the media page seem to communicate with each other, and this applies to all the pages here. Everything you do here is synchronized between these different pages. This means that the timeline I created in the edit page is then displayed in the Fairlight page, for example. Here in the media page, we have the option of accessing the file system directly. This means that I can access various folders here and select the material directly from here. So I don't have to drag and drop it here using Explorer or on a Mac using Finder. I can also do it this way, which is sometimes more convenient when you have a lot of material. In addition, the media page offers options for organizing material footage. This is very important if you have large projects. You can pre-sort everything into subfolders. You can even mark them with colors if you want. For example, I choose this clip here, right click, go to clip color and select, for example, yellow. Then this clip is shown with the color yellow. You can also preview everything here by simply hovering over it with the mouse and you'll see what's in the material. You can also preview everything here by simply hovering over it with the mouse and you'll see what's in the material in the preview window in the viewer. Then I can take a look at what I have here. And theoretically, there are also options here for synchronizing video and audio and other minor things. The media page isn't really relevant for us at the moment. It's mainly needed for larger projects. You can ignore it for now. Then we proceed to the Cut and Edit page. Let's start with the Edit page. This is the main workspace. This is where we will be doing all of our work steps. This means that we will hardly need the other pages today, except for the Deliver page. We will mainly be looking at the Edit page. This means that I won't explain it in detail now. We will take a closer look at it in a moment. I'll just briefly mention the Cut page, because it's basically a variant of the Edit page, a smaller version if you will, that works a little differently. There you have not just one timeline, but two. And the process of working here is a little bit different. It is designed for a specific way of working, which can be very effective and fast, but it is not suitable for every type of project and is not relevant for us at the beginning. This means you can ignore the Cut page for now. Everything you need at the beginning can be done in the Edit page, and theoretically you can do even more in the Edit page. Let's move on to Fusion. Fusion is a very advanced compositing program. Now that there's nothing in it, it looks pretty empty and boring, but it has a lot to offer. For example, if you go into this effects area. This is just a list of different node types, and there are a whole bunch of different tools in here, if you will, that you can use to create complex effects, 3D animations, or even transitions, that is, video transitions, for example. So anything that gets more complicated goes into Fusion, and Fusion is very complex, about as complex as the rest of DaVinci Resolve 20, I would say. In that respect, it's a topic that you can spend some time exploring separately if you're interested. We move on to the Color page, where all color editing and adjustments take place. This means that anything I want to change in terms of color in my image or video can be done on the Color page. There are also some effects and additional functions here, such as blur or an effect that I can use to give the video a slightly vintage look. All things related to color can be found on the Color page, including the huge color editing palette with color wheels, which offer an incredible number of options for adjusting the color of your video. This is also a relatively complex topic, but I would say it's a little easier to get into than Fusion, and you should definitely take a look at the basics, because it's always helpful to be able to do a little color correction on your video. But that's not the topic today either, because it would go a little beyond the scope of this article. So let's move on to Fairlight. Fairlight is a digital audio workstation, if you will. Basically, it's a complete audio environment, a special audio program. It's designed for complex audio editing, especially sound design for films. If that's what you're interested in, then Fairlight is worth checking out, because it offers a whole host of additional features specifically for audio editing. You don't need this for normal editing, but it's very important for audio. And that's why there's the extra Fairlight page specifically for audio editing. Nowadays, you can do almost everything related to standard audio editing in the Edit page. This means that you probably won't need the Fairlight page at all in the beginning. Then we come to the last page, which is the Deliver page. And in the Deliver page, the video is exported at the end. There are a few settings here where you can specify the codec and format, the name of the file, where to save it, and so on. and use them to create my video file, which ultimately contains my video that I can play. I'll show you how to do this briefly at the end of the video so that we end up with a finished video. If you liked this video so far, I would appreciate it if you could give me a thumbs up. And if you are generally interested in videos like this, feel free to subscribe to my channel. We are now back on the edit page and we will take a closer look at what can be found where and how to navigate around here. It may seem a bit overwhelming at first because DaVinci Resolve 20 is a relatively large program with a great many options. In principle, however, it is very well structured, and this structure is repeated across the different workspaces. This means that we have various tabs at the top left and the top right of each page that we can open and close, and you can't see much there yet. So that we can see something, I'll start by dragging a clip into the timeline below. This is our timeline area, and the moment I drag the clip in, a corresponding timeline clip was also created in my media pool. This is now our timeline, where we assemble our video. Now we have these tabs at the top left and top right, and we can quickly go through what's available here on the edit page. First, there's the media pool. This is where I have my clips, my video material, photos, and everything else I want to use in my video, which I will drag down into the timeline later. I can also create different folders here. Right-clicking allows me to create a new bin, which is also possible. Otherwise, it doesn't do much. It's really just for our material. Then we have this effects area. Here we find all kinds of additional tools that go beyond the standard settings available here in the inspector on the right-hand side. We'll take a closer look at the inspector in a moment. Here you can find things like video transitions, text, and animated titles, for example. Although this one here isn't animated, but there are animated ones too. And then there are generators. For example, if I just want the background color, I can simply insert a solid color generator or a gradient like this. There are a few more exciting ones further down. If you don't see some of the ones I have here now, those are all things I've installed additionally. You can get a wide variety of these transitions, titles, generators, and effects online from YouTube channels that have created these effects, or in stores that offer such transitions, titles, generators, and effects specifically, e.g. as packages, and you can install them additionally, and then they will also be displayed here. So these are ways to expand the toolbox. In the effects, there are a few more effects, such as this one. I can make the whole thing look like it's a CCTV camera, or binoculars, or some kind of comic book. You can find things like that here in the effects area. Then there's Resolve FX with filters like blur effects. Then there's Audio FX, which are audio effects as the name suggests. You can also install your own additional ones. Let's move on. We still have this index area here, which is uninteresting. The sound library is uninteresting for now. And we don't need the keyframe area for now either. We'll need it later for animation. That's why we won't be covering that in this video. I'm opening up this media pool again. And as you can see, I can open up two things on top of each other. That doesn't work with everything here, but it does with most things. And I can change the whole thing, whether I want the full height here or whether I only want half the height with this shrink button. And then I can make my timeline a little bigger. I find that a little more practical in this case. That's why I'm leaving it like that. Here on the right hand side, we first have the inspector, which is basically one of the most important work areas here in the edit page. This is where you'll find the default settings. For example, I can zoom in on my clip here. I can move it. And I can also rotate it. I can make simple adjustments like these here in my inspector. I'll reset it once with this button here. In addition to the inspector, we also have the option of viewing metadata here. It looks like this. Theoretically, there are even more options. If you click on all groups, you will see all kinds of additional metadata fields at the bottom, which are usually empty. When organizing large projects, you can enter additional information here to help you organize everything. We don't need that for now. But this metadata area at the top is very helpful, where you can see a few useful things, such as the frame rate of the clip, the resolution, or how long it is. Then we have this mixer here, and the mixer usually hangs down here on the right. And you can leave it open. It doesn't really interfere with the timeline, but you can also make it disappear with this button. And it just shows me my audio tracks. Currently, there is one audio track which was created by default when I imported my first clip, and I can see it as A1. And when I play the audio here, you'll see a waveform here, and you'll also see the whole thing in bus 1 at the end. That's my audio output at the end. The details here aren't that relevant for now. You can leave them here or remove them. They are not really relevant for our first video. Then we have this quick export button, which allows you to export relatively quickly. However, I will still show you how to export correctly on the deliver page, where you can also adjust the various settings. That's because everything here is very limited. Okay, to wrap up the overview of the edit page, we have the viewer here, as you can see, which you can adjust by removing the sidebar completely, which will reveal an additional icon here. If you're working on a large monitor, you'll always see it, but on a smaller monitor, you won't see it if the sidebar is still open. So close it. The other one works too, of course. It just gives you more space. And then I can click on this icon here, and I'll have a second viewer here on the left hand side. This is designed for a specific workflow where I can view my clips in the left hand viewer, cut out a section, and then drag it into the timeline. And then I still have the option of viewing any point in the timeline in parallel on the right viewer. And in the source viewer, as the left viewer is called, selecting the material here from my media pool. That's the whole point behind this dual viewer. We don't need it for this video, so I'll just close it to give us a little more space. And here, below the viewer, we have a few options for playing the video. That means I can of course play, stop, and also rewind, or skip to the end. And below that, there are several editing tools. We'll take a closer look at those in a moment. But first, you can see that there is basically a bar with various tools. Okay, that's it for the edit page for now. There's not much else here, except for certain additional functions that you can find in the submenus at the top. Depending on what function you're looking for, you'll usually find it here at the top. If you can find it somewhere else directly on the clip, or down here in the timeline, or here in the timeline. Let's just get started and put together a little video in the timeline. I'll just take a clip that I like, for example this one, and we can see that when I hover over it with the mouse, I automatically get a preview right here in my viewer and can take a look at it. That's really handy. The viewer now automatically switches between the source view and the timeline view, depending on where I am. And if I want to take a closer look here, I can also double click on it. Then it will be loaded into the source viewer, and I can also scroll through it here at the bottom to take a closer look. I'll just take a clip here and drag it into the timeline. This allows me to simply drag and drop my material into the timeline. And to move in the timeline, I can use the keys on the keyboard and the mouse wheel. Alternatively, you can also use the settings at the top or the scroll bar. This means I can use this slider to zoom in and out and adjust how much of the timeline I can see. There are also presets you can use, and I can move around the timeline. You can scroll down using this bar. But it also works if I hold down the Alt key and then scroll with the scroll wheel. It looks like this. This allows me to zoom in and out, and I always zoom in on this red playhead. That's what the red thing is called, this needle, and enlarge the view around it. To scroll in the timeline, I can simply hold down the Control key and scroll with the mouse. On a Mac, this is done with the Command key, and for zooming, it is the Option key. Otherwise, the shortcuts I'll mention here are always the same in the default settings for Mac. That means when I say Control, on Mac it's usually Command, that is the CMD key. And when I say Alt, on Mac it's usually Option. I'm explaining this for Windows because I work on Windows. I don't want this first clip to be so long. I only want the last part of it, so we need to trim it. And that's relatively simple. I'll zoom in a little closer. To move the beginning or the end, I can simply move my mouse pointer close to this cut, click on it, and then drag it to the side. And then we can see that the whole thing is shortened here. I can basically just cut it here at the bottom of the timeline and select the section I want. And this small section is actually enough for me. I can play the whole thing back with the spacebar, and then I can simply move the clips here. And we can see that when I move them up to the other clips, at a certain point they jump. And I can see that from the gray line and these arrows showing where they are cut. If I do it in the second track, it works the same way. We can also see that a new video track V2 is automatically created, and I can basically place these clips on top of it. When I play it back, it automatically switches to the clip above, because these clips are basically stacked on top of each other, and whatever is on top, if it's not transparent, is what I see in my final result. In this case, we don't need a second video track. I'll drag it back into the first one. Theoretically, we can change this behavior, this snapping to other clips. And there are situations where I definitely need to do that. In that case, I can deactivate this magnet labeled snapping, and then I can place it freely. But it can also happen that I move the clip here a little bit, or that a single frame remains free in between, which is then black at the end. And that's why this function exists, so that it can't happen accidentally. That's why it's best to leave it enabled by default and only disable it when you really need it. If I want to cut out something out of the clip, I have to make a cut, and there's this blade tool for that, which gives me a little red line, and when I click on it, I can simply make a cut in the clip. You can see it here as this dotted line. When I go back to normal mode, I can start cutting again. This way, I could simply cut out a section in between and then rejoin the whole thing together. There's also a shortcut for cutting, then you don't need this blade mode anymore. It's very handy to remember this, because you'll need it very often. This is Ctrl B, and it automatically sets a cut where I have placed my red marker, my playhead. It's best to select the clip I want to cut, because if I have several clips on top of each other, I can then use this to determine which clips are cut. If nothing is selected, everything will simply be cut through. And then we can see that I have created another cut here, and can again select my section and push the whole thing together. So that's a lot about cutting and trimming. Trimming is what you call cutting the edges. Now if I want to delete clips, I can simply select the clip and then either press the backspace key, which is used to delete letters, or press the delete key to delete the clip. Let's see what happens, because there are two keys for this, because they have different functions. When I use backspace, this is what happens. A gap is left and my clip is removed. I undo the whole thing using the key combination Ctrl Z. You can also see this at the top under Edit, Undo. Redo is Ctrl Shift Z, and on a Mac, the corresponding key combination is also displayed here. That should normally be Command plus Z. Now we can delete it again using the other method, namely the delete key. This is usually located under the right side of the keyboard, to the right of the Enter key. However, this varies slightly depending on the keyboard. When I press it, we see that the rest of the timeline shifts up. This means that there is no gap. This is a very practical method because you don't normally want to have gaps. However, there are situations where these gaps should definitely remain, and especially at the beginning, when you have a lot of things on top of each other and also audio clips that may still be superimposed here, overlaps. It can happen very quickly that you delete something you didn't want to delete. Therefore, I recommend using the backspace at the beginning. This is the key that I use to simply delete. Normal deletion of letters. It's the same key, so I don't accidentally delete something I actually still need. It's even possible to delete the gaps yourself. To do this, I can simply click on them. Then they are highlighted here, and then I press the delete or backspace. In this case, it doesn't matter. Then the cut is deleted and the clip moves up. In this case, the result is the same as if I had used the delete key directly. Just experiment a little with it, and I think it will quickly become relatively clear. Let's stay here in this bar and take another look at the other tools that are interesting here. There is the special Trim Edit mode. When I click and drag clips in normal mode, I simply move the entire clip. But when I do this in Trim Edit mode, a new icon appears here, which changes depending on whether I'm in the thumbnail area or down here in the blue area with the text. This allows me to slip and slide. I always forget which is which, but basically I use one function to move the video within these boundaries in the timeline. This means that I can basically select a different section from my original material. So if I like the duration here and I say I want to keep the timing exactly the same, but I want to change the section here. For example, I rather have the section at the end where I have more of these flamingos, which I think is down here in my video. Then I can easily adjust it this way. We can do the same thing here. I can also select a different section. For example, the one where something really happens here. And then there's the other option. If I want to move a clip between the clips a little bit, in normal mode, I can only do that. And then I would have to drag it back here so that there's no gap. With this other mode, using the tool here at the button, It's relatively easy. I can simply move it in front of the other clips and they automatically move up as far as possible. And with all these operations, you always see these white frame lines, which show me how much material is still available. That means I can drag it up to here, but no further. This is simply because there is no more material left from the first video. If I drag it further, it will only go so far. And then it won't have any more material available because the video ends here. So these frames always indicate how much footage is still available. This becomes even clearer when we work with transitions. This makes it relatively easy for me to use these additional tools. This makes it relatively easy for me to use these additional tools. We don't need that for now. It's a special mode for working. There are a few special buttons here for adding clips to the timeline. I just want to show you one of them briefly. There is the option here to insert a clip between two clips using Insert Clip button. To do this, I simply click it on the timeline, place the playhead, click on the clip, and click again on click Insert Clip. And it is simply inserted in between, and everything to the right of it moves back a bit to make room for the new clip. This is very practical because it saves you the hassle of selecting all the clips on the right and moving them to the right, as you would normally have to do. This saves a lot of time and is a great advantage of this feature. The others here are for overwriting or replacing clips, for example. You can play around with them a bit, but it's not that important here for now. There are also other modes for inserting into the timeline. You can find them by hovering over a clip, clicking on it, and dragging it into the viewer. Then I see a menu on the right hand side with various modes, some of which are here, such as Insert, which we just used. A very practical mode available here is Append at End. And if I just drop it there, it will automatically be appended to the end of my timeline. That's very handy. This way, without having to drag and drop everything into exactly the right place, you can quickly add several clips together. If I select several here, I can add them to the end and then they're all right after each other. That's very practical. If we continue along this bar, we have just looked at that. Linked selection. This is a function that controls the selection of video and audio together. That means we find this symbol here at the bottom of this clip and also at the bottom of this clip. And these are clips that had an audio track in them. In other words, material that had an audio track included by default. These ones here don't have that. Video clips that contain audio are always automatically linked here. This means that when I click on one of them, the corresponding partner is always clicked on as well. This means that when I cut here, the audio is cut in exactly the same way. And there are situations where I don't want that. Normally, it's practical, normally that's what you want, but sometimes it's not. A typical example is when I do a J or an L cut. I'll show you briefly what that is. If I cut this bit here to the point where the nice gentleman here starts talking, then I might want him to start talking earlier. While you can still see the material before that. And that would be a J cut. To do this, you make the cut in the video a little later than the cut in the audio. In this case, in practice, it basically looks like this. I deactivate linked selection here, cut away a little bit at the beginning, maybe not too much, and then basically push this clip until I have this J cut. This is how you can visualize it. This is supposed to represent a J, so to speak. Of course, it also works the other way around. That would then be an L cut. In that case, I would see the video first and the audio a little bit later, and then you would have achieved that effect. The important thing is to make sure that you have activated it normally, because otherwise you can easily end up pulling apart clips that are supposed to be synchronized. I can easily move it independently of the other without any major problems. Then I see this message, this warning, that it is now delayed by 2 seconds compared to the audio track, and that tells me that something may not be quite right. Or in certain situations you might want it that way, but then you do it deliberately. One thing I'd like to quickly show you are these markers here. When I click on them, I can easily add a marker here in the timeline. I can double click on it, give it a name, click on Done, and then when I hover over it, I can see what it is. This allows me to mark specific areas. When I select a clip, this marker is placed directly in the clip. That's another option. I can double click to edit it and then to remove it. Now let's take another quick look at how far we can still customize our clips here. And to do that, I'll just pick a clip where I want to change something. With this clip, for example. Okay, it's nice to see the water down here, but maybe I don't want to see it so much and would rather focus on the airplane. In this case, I'll just go to the inspector at the top right and we can enlarge it with this button. Then I can zoom in and move it to the side to get more of this section. And now it looks like this. And of course, I want this single section. So just this section, for example, like that. And then I can select and delete the gaps here so that the whole thing moves up. Alternatively, with this clip, I might want to rotate it a little bit. To do that, I just go to the rotation angle, rotate it a little bit, and then zoom in so that these black edges disappear again. Like that. And then I've just rotated the clip. So you can try a few things out here. There are also various other ways to edit clips. These are really just the standard tools. For example, there is the option to simply cut off the top and bottom, left and right. Therefore I go to cropping, move this bar, for example, this would be an option if I had another clip underneath, so I could cut out a piece of this clip and then position it over the other somehow. I'll undo that again with Ctrl Z. Then there is the option below to add dynamic zoom. This creates a zoom that runs throughout the duration of the video. Let me show you. I'll turn it on. And you can clearly see the effect. I'll leave everything as it is. I won't change anything. And now you can see that the whole thing zooms out a little bit. You can see this even more clearly if I make this clip shorter. Because it now covers the same zoom distance over a shorter period of time. You can customize the whole thing by selecting dynamic zoom below the viewer, which will display boxes that indicate the start and end frames. That is, how large my section should be at the end and at the beginning. Then I can also change the whole thing here, make it even more extreme, and put it on this person, for example, and then the whole thing will look like this when I look at the end. When you click again on this icon, dynamic zoom, you come to normal mode. If I change the whole thing with swap, then we have the zoom on it here. Let's play it. So much for dynamic zoom. I can also deactivate that. That allows you to make the video a little more interesting. We'll ignore the composite for now, it's not that important. Speed change allows me to change the speed if I want to double the speed on this clip here. This will certainly be a slow motion recording now. That means maybe I want to have it back at full speed. Then I'll just say 200 here. And then the whole thing gets a little symbol here. That an adjustment has been made to the speed and then the whole thing is played back twice as fast. Let's play it. I can always reset all these settings using these little curly arrows. That is this one, this entire area, this entire section, and using the arrows here without the plus, this line. Let's do it. Now it is reset. This is usually a single parameter. Alternatively, if I have changed something here, I can do that by double-clicking on the name. Now it is reset. Below that, there's another option for stabilizing the video. That means if my video is shaky, I just press stabilize and the clip will be stabilized. There are a few more settings for that, but we won't look at them in detail now. Here's another thing that's quite interesting. If you have already the DaVinci Resolve Studio version, you can use this AI Superscale feature. This is one of the AI features available, and it allows you to upscaling and enhancing and, for example, make material footage recorded in 720p more suitable for a full HD timeline by using AI Superscale here, which adds information and improves the quality of my material. You can scale 2 times enhanced, 3 times enhanced, or 4 times enhanced, for example. It simply adds a little more sharpness and a little more detail to the material. As I said, these AI functions are not available in the free version, unfortunately. Now let's add a few transitions and effects. First, let's get rid of this area. Our video is a bit chaotic as there are now several clips strung together. We'll turn it into a little mini slideshow, so to speak, and to insert transitions, that is, transitions between 2 clips, we'll go to the effects area at the top and then to video transitions in the toolbox. And the standard transition that you actually use most often, if you use transitions at all, is the cross dissolve. And I can see the whole thing in my preview. That means if I'm standing near the cut here, it takes the cut and shows me what the transitions would look like. And then we can see that they all work a little bit differently. They all have a slightly different effect. And then there are also shapes that nobody really uses. And you can install additional ones here, or there are also some really funny ones available from DaVinci Resolve itself. Let's move a little bit down. For example, or these ones. Something like this, for example. You can try them all out and, if necessary, install any free packages or additional paid ones. There are definitely a lot of possibilities. To bring the transition into the timeline now, I'll use this cross dissolve in this case and simply drag it into the cut. And now in this case, I can't drag it to the center of the cut, but only to the left side here. Let's see how it looks here. Here it works. Here I can really drag it to the center, and that has to do with the availability of footage. In some cases, you won't be able to apply the transition at all. It's simply not possible, and this is always the case when the clips are read on both sides. For example here, let's test here. Here we have the same problem. Read. This means that there are simply no material available to create a transition. If I want to insert a transition here, it won't work. And also here it won't work. Because there is simply no material footage here. Same here. It won't be displayed because it simply doesn't work. I can't do a crossfade between material that isn't there. I can edit the whole thing. When I click on it, I have the settings for it again here in the inspector. When I go to transition, I can see the settings. The same applies for the effects. There you can find the settings here in the effects area, but again in the inspector. That means I can now adjust a few things here. In most cases, you don't need to adjust these, but you can if you want to. You can also select other standard transition types from the list at the top. Not all of them are included in the list here. Only the standard transitions that are available in DaVinci Resolve. For example, if I select the type box, it looks like this. No one would probably do that nowadays either. To remove a transition, I simply click on it until it is highlighted in red. Then press remove and it's gone. Let's take a quick look at titles. If you just want normal text without any additional effects or animations, like this, I simply use text or text plus. The difference isn't very big at first, so if you can't find the option you're looking for in one, just try the other. They are very slightly different in terms of the options they offer. I usually just use Text Plus because it actually offers more options. Since DaVinci Resolve 20, there is now also this multi-text. Let's just use that for now. I simply drag it into the timeline like a normal video clip to the place where I want it. And it is then displayed above the video. I can edit it just like any other video clip. It works the same way here. And since it is text, I can stretch it as long as I want. Of course, there's no limit. If I look back here in the inspector, I can adjust the settings here. This means I can enter text here somehow. But let's do something else first. We'll delete it briefly and click on this text box. and add new text with this text box layout. This text box has the advantage that it automatically inserts line breaks. This is also new in DaVinci Resolve 20. If I write something there, then we can see that it is automatically broken up. For example, this is useful if you want to insert a lot of text into a video in DaVinci Resolve 20. Previously, you always had to insert line breaks manually. Now it is automatic, and I can also display this box by going to the Fusion overlay here at the bottom of this options menu. These are basically different overlays for editing directly in the viewer. In this case, it's the Fusion overlay because the multi-text is essentially a fusion effect, if you will. With this box, I can now set how wide this text area should be. For example, I can play with it. I can also move the whole thing directly and drag it somewhere else. So it's a very easy way to add text here. Then I can also choose any bright color. For example, this. And theoretically, there are other options for customizing this text. For example, I could add an outline here under shading. In this case, I go to Outline, click on Enable, and choose a color. This is simply to make the text easier to see. There are various options for customizing text. And if I want to add another text, I can simply create another box layout. I click here, and now I have another text that I can drag somewhere else. And all of this in one text, which is new in DaVinci Resolve 20. Of course, you can also use the normal text plus. The options are presented a little differently here and are more directly available, I would say. This is the normal text if you only need a single text. We are not going to look into the generators. They are not that exciting. We can pick out one of the effects again. For example, the comic book effect. Just drag it into the clip you want. In this case, this is the function of how to apply the effect, so to speak. You drag it onto a clip and apply it to that clip. And even then, when I select the clip, I see the corresponding options for the effect in the inspector again. There are now different tabs here. The video tab option, which we have just seen, these are the normal options that are always here anyway. Audio is, if I have an audio track, just for this audio track, that means, for example, I can adjust the volume here, and in the effects area, I now find, because there's an effect on it in this clip, the adjustment for this corresponding effect that I have used here. And then I can, for example, set how strong this effect should be. This is not an effect that I normally use. To delete such an effect again, if I find it stupid now, I can simply use this trash icon here, and then the whole thing is removed. There are a few here. That's also something I would recommend just trying out. Something like this, for example. Is actually quite funny. Let's play it. That's really nice. Last but not least, I would like to add an audio track, just a music track that we'll put under the video to make the whole thing a bit more interesting, I would say. I now remove some clips that we don't need here in the timeline. And I put this audio track up here in the media pool under master folder audio clips. And I can now just drag it down here in the audio area. Just like that. Let's listen to the audio track. That's too loud. You can grab this white fine line here and drop the volume, for example, -30. Let's play it again. That's better. We'll leave it with this volume. Here is the trend line, and we have already seen that the audio clips are always green and are stacked at the bottom, so to speak. That means that if more are added, they would be added in further audio tracks underneath. Of course, they are then played simultaneously, and the video tracks are stacked upwards with the blue tracks. As for the audio, I can now edit it just like videos. It's exactly the same. That means I can cut off the beginning. Here too. If I don't want that, the whole beginning, but only this section that I have now selected, and I can basically shorten it to the length I need. And I can also set small fades for the audio to fade in the whole thing in this case. So that it doesn't start abruptly because I cut it here. That usually sounds stupid. Doesn't have to be that long. Something like that would be enough in the end. A fade out doesn't hurt either. You can just use these little dots at the end of the clips and at the beginning, which you can just drag in. The same goes for the video, by the way, and we can add that here at the end to fade the video to black towards the end. Or it will be made almost transparent. That means that since there is currently nothing underneath, it is simply faded to black, because the timeline shows black when there is nothing in it. So now we have created our video, and if we want to export it now, because we are done, the next thing we do is go to the deliver page. And I'm going to click on this icon down here. And to keep the whole thing as simple as possible, we basically see our timeline here. Again, our clips that we use in our video. We also have a viewer, but otherwise it's relatively complex and you have a lot of settings here. To keep it as simple as possible, you can either click on H.264 master preset or H.265 master preset and then set the necessary settings, file name, location. I have a high performing NVIDIA graphic cards, that's why I choose H.265 master. I call my project DaVinci Resolve 20 Beginner Tutorial. Let's choose the location. And the settings down here, you can leave it like that for now. With these settings, you get an export that is good, that works. And depending on what you really need in the end, you can adjust various settings here. Sometimes you don't want H.264, but H.265 or MP4. Then you could just select that down here. For example, format. You can choose, for example, MP4 if you want. Encoder, I could also choose NVIDIA, and so on. Resolution, timeline resolution, yes. To render the whole thing now, the first thing to do is to add it to render list. That means I've now basically made a setting, and down here in the timeline, the area I'm rendering is marked. This is the gray selection here. I can also mark them here or move this selection. I can do that too. For example, let's say I want only this part here, then this area would only be used for export and not the entire area. I want the whole thing, so I leave the selection as it was and now click on Add to Render Queue. And now it's added here on the right side in the render list, and it shows me all my render jobs. That means you can see that if you have large projects here and want to render many timelines at the same time, then you can do that very easily. Make the settings here for the individual videos that you want to export, add them all here, and at the end you just click render all. And then the whole thing is rendered, and especially if you have a large project, you can also let it run overnight and let all the rendering jobs work through. And now that's done. That was a relatively short video, and it's then saved under the appropriate path, and then we have created a finished video. I hope this has shown you everything you need to know to get your project started. Starting with this video, I will make a large beginner series in the future. That means feel free to take a look at my channel. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, hype, share and subscribe. Thank you.